talk of a political dirt unit.
It's typical of this job.
Daniel, hello, my friend.
Brendan, hello.
We're recording video. We're recording video this time for the first time in a long time. So anyone who's on the Dirt Unit YouTube page is probably just going to be like, "What the fuck? Like, you're missing about like 50 episodes of context." But you get that on the big jobs, and here we are. And I think actually the last episode I put up was one that you were on. So,
oh right,
kind of, yeah. I think it was
like one of the first ones we did. Back in the
you
day.
and Brendan McKenna, yeah.
Oh yes, of course.
And so,
shout out Brendan McKenna wherever he is.
Yeah, wherever he is. Certainly keeping his mouth shut. Wherever he is. We need you, buddy. Oh, how are you? Good?
Yeah, I'm good. I've gone down a massive rabbit hole thanks to yourself since our last episode about the Bible and you know the influence that's had on the world. So thank you for that. But we'll get into that another time, I guess.
Yeah, well,
we've got more pressing matters to deal with today.
Get through today.
Yes.
I mean, it would kind of make sense to go into that today, considering the last two episodes we've done on the podcast feed, but
it's waited this long. It can wait a bit more. There's more pressing things.
Well, I mean, as it turns out, this also fits in this sequence of episodes.
It's all the same shit, really, isn't it?
Yeah. So we're going to talk about Jeffrey Epstein.
Okay.
I don't know if you've heard about this guy.
The problem that, you know, whenever you hear about Epstein, it's all about what Trump's doing and how it relates to that. And what there's not enough of is telling us about his actual story and where he's come from. So I'm hoping that's something that you might be able to help us.
Well, I mean, it's timely. But like it's actually like there's so much coming out there daily about this guy. I wouldn't be surprised if no one ever sees this this video pop up on YouTube, because the amount of Epstein clips is just crazy. It's like every single person with a platform that's been ignoring the situation for the last 10 years, and then over the first Trump term and this new Trump term, I guess a lot of people just kind of classed it as a QAnon, MAGA type thing and put it to the side and sort of dismissed it. And then now that it's kind of blowing up again, and people are finally cottoning on to the fact that like Trump is very much a part of whatever that circle is. People are interested, and they're getting on the internet and they're diving into it, and then they're making videos. Here's the real story about Jeffrey Epstein, and it's just the same rehash shit, over and over again.
Well, that's not what we're here for. We're here for the good shit. Have you got some of the good shit for us?
I wouldn't say it's good shit. No, I got some shit.
Okay.
So when it comes to like research on Epstein and what's out there, there's a lot of people going around on podcasts at the moment and doing a several hour thing about giving the scoop on Epstein. And the source for all of these people, fairly positive, is a book called One Nation Under Blackmail by Whitney Webb. Mm-hmm. And I had a look through the book. She's done a really good job of explaining a lot of sort of the deeper threads going on around this guy and his associates. So I'm really good at that. But by her own admission, there's no smoking gun in the book. She's just done the best she can to lay out the context around, all the figures around the guy. But the impression that you get that is apparent from anyone who seems to talk about it that has read the book, they kind of just get stuck on the Israel stuff. They get sucked in by the Jew trap.
Right.
And they kind of miss the point completely. So I guess that's sort of the premise I've come into on this in this investigation, is the premise that the Israel stuff is a distraction. And what does it look like if we know that from a starting point and then have a look at the network. You'll see what I mean as I go along, and you'll see why. I'll explain.
Try and see past the distractions.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's very easy to do, like it's very easy to do. There's a lot of Israel intelligence sort of ties, but there's a lot of other intelligence ties as well. And it clouds, it really sort of clouds, the judgment of anyone trying to put it together. Because as we've said a lot in the last few months on this podcast, history did only begin in 1948 and nothing happened before then. So any context that you need for anything is when the main two culprits that everyone keeps saying this guy could be working for, Mossad and the CIA, history only starts when they were created. We don't look at who created them and, anything else that comes into it. And so that is kind of like that is the first camp of Epstein. It's was Epstein intelligence? And the next question is, was it Mossad or the CIA? There's another camp of Epstein people, and that's the camp of the network's not important. What about the victims? And they just care about the details of, how much of a predator he was and the horrible stuff he did to a lot of women. Mm-hmm. And absolutely, you can't forget the victims. Completely support what they're doing, but they're not going to help us understand the why.
What's going on?
And the other camp, the most insufferable camp, is the release the list people.
Okay.
Here's this guy, according to them, this pedo spy Jew, and the solution is to release the blackmail tapes. So the government itself to release the blackmail tapes to the public, which is technically and legally child pornography. It just doesn't make any sense. And I think that is also a big distraction with this whole thing. So, let's just be clear. There is no Epstein list. There never was a list. That's just the words that the data said would be the most effective for the Trump campaign. We've got the Epstein list. We've got the closest thing there is to a list. It's his little black book. It was leaked years ago. But they were just contacts, not clients, even though there were certain people circled to indicate that they were people that were in on it by the person who handed the diary to whoever he handed it to. And it's worth noting that Donald Trump was one of those circled names. But that's the closest thing we've got to a list, and it's already out there. So Trump's not on it because it doesn't exist. It's not a thing.
Okay.
So the question from there is why is Trump so scared? And it's interesting because there's actually a lot of people at the moment out there trying to excuse it away for Trump, saying I don't think Trump's, implicated. He's just trying to protect powerful buddies that we don't know about yet or something like that. And so it's that I say, no, we know his buddies that were friends with Epstein. They're there. It's out there. All his buddies are friends with Epstein. Trump wasn't a client of Epstein. So we'll just get that out of the way. He was not a client. He's implicated.
Financially, or
he wasn't using the, he wasn't being blackmailed by Epstein and getting sold women. He was a peer of Epstein. So
and Epstein wasn't managing his money or anything.
No. Yeah. He was a peer. They were friends. They most likely were. You can make up your own mind as we look at the facts. So, before we just dive into it, I'm just going to go over some terminology that I've used just to avoid confusion. Firstly, I don't typically use the term deep state. I don't know if I've ever really referred to something as the deep state on this podcast.
True.
I use it a bunch of times here because there is no other words to concisely describe the things that need to be described. That is what it is.
So what do we mean by that then? What's the deep state?
You'll get it. You'll understand as we go.
The common understanding of it.
It's the privatization of the intelligence services to a compartmentalized, secret, private intelligence agency into a multinational intelligence agency run by the former heads of those countries and intelligence agencies, but
With
we'll
an
go into
outsized
that
influence.
more as we go. More importantly, though, to understand this complex network at the heart of this story, we need a bit of a system of description. So you'll hear me refer to things like the rider tier or the rider class or the architects. And so these guys are your sort of people that are most likely in on something and knows what is happening with everyone else.
You say the writer class?
Rider, as
What's
in riding the horse.
Okay.
Or the architects. I think I use it sort of like interchangeably. And then the other sort of tier I'll refer to is the service tier. And the service tier are the contractors, I guess, that do like the groundwork. These are the people that probably think they understand what they're doing and why people want them to do it. But they probably most likely don't. This is like they're just like a compartmentalized fraction of the whole, if that makes sense. These are the people motivated by money or whatever else comes with it, whatever perversion comes with it. These are the deniable, amoral, highly specialized contractors hired by the rider tier to execute the hands-on work of their project. So this is like private intelligence firms, political fixers, financial criminals, and, of course, sexual blackmail specialists.
Right.
And so I'm not going to focus too much on the exact crimes as we go, like the specifics or the sex crimes anyway. I'm just going to do what I do best, which is information archaeology. We're going to follow the network. So it's important to state up front that I don't have any definitive answers here. We can't say what any motives were of anyone at any point, especially Epstein, because he's dead and he didn't tell us. But, I think we've got a pretty good system down by now, and we're looking at networks that are, by their nature, very obscured. And this may be able to help us discern some motives. And thanks to the last 4 or so episodes of this podcast, which were not supposed to be a sequential thing, nor did I even anticipate doing this one, but as it turns out, it's provided a pretty well-rounded understanding of the context here. So It's not about a list. There is no list. What there is, though, is files from the FBI or the Justice Department. There's the investigation into Epstein. And as you'll realize as we go along here, they ain't releasing the files. There's not a chance in hell they're releasing the files.
I've heard it's pretty boring stuff anyway, really.
Yeah, exactly.
There's not really
it's too
much.
dry.
It's just there's nothing there.
But even if they did, like, it still, I guess, would be hard to even understand without the context, right? So, using this, sort of system we've developed of looking at networks and stuff, I don't think we've actually been, like, off the mark in any meaningful way with any of them, have we? I mean,
never.
Not that I can think of.
Never.
So, like, if I'm honest, like, I've almost pulled the pin on this one a few times, because it's wild as fuck, and it's like, I mean, we can't be right on this one. Like, we can't. So let's just say, we can't. But at the same time, I'm just about to lay out some facts, and just facts. But let's just say, I really fucking hope I'm not right here.
Well,
so buckle up, Daniel.
Okay, here we go.
So if we're going to do this right, we got to talk about a thing called the Great Game. To gloss over a very complicated and long-spanning, a century-long war between the British and Russian empires in the 1800s, fighting for control over Central Asia. Tibet, Afghanistan, Persia, all the places that are still pretty fucked today. If the term Cold War had been invented back then this would have been the definition. It was a war played by spies, by proxies, and by a unique beast known as the British East India Company, which was less a company, more a private corporate empire with its own army, intelligence service, and foreign policy. And you can go back 4 episodes on the podcast feed, and there's another few hours of context on them for you.
It sounds like they're getting a bit far from their geographical roots, though. Did you say this is like up around Eastern Europe kind of thing?
Yeah, but remember how we mentioned in the East India Company episode where they had secured the trade routes from India through Afghanistan and Persia, and those trade routes were sovereign East India Company territory.
Of course,
and they had like agreements with the Persians and the Afghans and whatever. And then like any employees were only governed by East India Company laws and not the laws of the countries that they were operating in.
It's always been about the those routes, the trade routes are the crucial, right? As crucial as the trade itself.
Yeah, and East India Company.
What was his name? Henry the Navigator. That's what kicked off the whole age of exploration. The Portuguese guy realized you got to control the routes. And
the East India Company learned that lesson well. But this was at the tail end of them. So they were fading from being the merchant state of India, but they were just doing the empire's dirty work on their trade routes through Asia, extending influence, all with a convenient layer of commercial plausible deniability for the British Empire. And that's the key idea of that, the privatization of imperial ambition. Now, you let that idea fester for a few decades, and along comes a bloke called Cecil Rhodes in the 1870s. Again, go back 3 episodes on the podcast to get all the context you need there. All roads lead to London. This guy basically corners the world's diamond market in South Africa, propped up by a global financial system flush with cash from places like the Australian goldfields. But Rhodes wasn't just about money. Money was his tool, and his goal was grand. He had a vision laid out in his will to create a secret society that would become the Round Table movement, to essentially ensure the dominance of the English-speaking world and bring everything back under a kind of neo-British imperial control, including and especially the USA. And that's not like a fringe theory or anything. That's what happened. And he was right at the center of one of the most, well, at the time, the most powerful empire the world had ever seen. And, his protege and successor, Alfred Milner, guy who became the managing director of Rio Tinto, and a massive figure in the British war cabinet during World War I. If you look at the painting of the Treaty of Versailles, he is the 3rd person on the right from the signing of the treaty. He was a master strategist, a true believer in the cause. He also wrote the Balfour Declaration, but we'll get there in a sec.
Yes, that's where I thought.
And we, the Round Table Group was a empire-spanning thing. We had our own Round Table groups here in Australia, every city. The Murdoch family was there from the start. If Rupert had been in the game while the Round Table groups were a thing, he would have been the 3rd generation Murdoch Round Table member. And this legacy, this core group, I guess, didn't go away, even though the Round Table groups did after World War II. They became things that still exist today. They joined up with more like-minded rich people and created things like the Institute for Public Affairs and the Liberal Party. The organisation dropped the Round Table label after the war and just started operating primarily through the institutions they set up, namely the Royal Institute of International Affairs, Chatham House in London, and the Council on Foreign Relations in the US. It was the same people and the same pattern and the same deal, powerful semi-secret network operating behind the scenes, steering official state policy for a long-term ideological goal.
It's so upsetting that like all the people who talk about conspiracies and, the Rothschilds and the WHO and the UN and all this sort of stuff, they just, I know we've made this point probably dozens of times, but it's just so frustrating that like there are all these very real conspiratorial networks controlling the world for their elite purposes, and they just get missed in favor of these fictional progressive boogeymen that get invented.
I'll tell you why. A network,
please do.
A network this powerful and ambitious has a problem. It needs a cover when things go horribly, horribly wrong. Yeah. When people start asking questions about who's really pulling the strings here and why, you need a distraction. You need a lightning rod to soak up all the anger. And this is where things get really dark and really messy if, of course, you ignore all the eugenic stuff that came out of this same roundtable network, which we are for now, but which we also need to note for later. And where you see a tactic used that is still in play today. Throughout history, the go-to scapegoat in the Western world has been the Jews.
Commies? Oh,
The
who's
Jews.
that? The Jews. Jews,
The
commies.
Same.
Often interchangeable, yes.
So all the way from medieval bullshit about blood libel to Tsarist pogroms and the Nazis, it's an old and brutally effective playbook. In the 19th century, as the British Empire's financial power became almost mythically complex, this ancient prejudice found a new modern target in the Rothschild family. Here you have this unbelievably wealthy Jewish banking dynasty. Nathan Rothschild propped up the Bank of England with a massive injection of his own gold after the Napoleonic Wars. A generation later, his son Lionel provided a last-minute off-the-books loan directly to Prime Minister Disraeli to buy the Suez Canal, the crucial artery of the British Empire. And not for a single second am I suggesting that these people aren't worthy of suspicion. You could argue absolutely correctly that none of this bullshit would be happening if it wasn't for them. But
There'd
that's
be
not the
some other
point.
bullshit happening.
Yeah, but this specific bullshit directly funded by them. I think you can still make that argument. The standard conspiracy narrative, the one that you still find saturating the internet, screams the Rothschilds control everything. Hence, a Jewish cabal runs the world. But who actually benefited from the actions of the Rothschilds?
Our roundtable friends.
Yeah, Nathan's move saved the British government's ass. Lionel's loan secured the single most important strategic asset for the British Empire. The Rothschilds weren't the puppet masters. They were the most effective, most trusted, high-level private contractors the British establishment had ever found. They were British Jews, deeply embedded in and loyal to the British imperial system, a fact proven by their central role with the state's-owned Bank of England and their prominence within the City of London.
This is Nathan and Lionel Rothschild, right? Specifically?
Well, they were it was Nathan, and then it was Lionel, and then it was Nathaniel. And Nathaniel was it Nathaniel? It was something that sounds like Nathan, but it's not. And he was.
I remember we said the original Rothschild had a bunch of kids, and they went off and established their dynasties in all the different countries,
different
right?
cities, yeah.
And so we're talking about the ones who went to
London.
England.
The London Rothschilds, yeah.
Nathan, Lionel, and
Nathaniel. It was Natty Rothschild, who was the one that was friends with Cecil Rhodes. Their Jewishness was the perfect tool for misdirection. Here, they had a highly educated, financially skilled, and transnational network that was, for centuries, stateless. They were the perfect deniable non-state instrument for an imperial power that needed to project its financial influence without official fingerprints. The real power structure, the old aristocratic families, the merchant guilds, and the imperial strategists like Milner and the Rhodes network could operate in the shadows. And if the peasants got too close to figuring out how the system of finance and influence actually worked, the elites had a ready-made answer they could whisper into the right ears. It's the Jews. It's the Rothschilds.
It's disappointing. That's not very nice to their friends who were kind enough to lend them enough money to buy the fucking Suez Canal.
How does this mean that the state of Israel today, which is what I'm implying here, and all its giant infrastructure of Israeli influence in the United States and the world, how does that mean they're supporting Britain? Well, they're very intertwined, but no, they're not supporting Britain. They're supporting Israel. But Israel is the British mandate for Palestine. It was all set up by the British. The Mossad was taught how to be a spy agency by MI6. They still work hand in hand. Mossad is the sixth eye in the Five Eyes network. They share tech. They got like a tech sharing, agreement and stuff. All that. They work incredibly close with MI6, just as close as they do with the CIA, if not closer. Worth noting that the billionaires that support Israel never live in Israel. Israel essentially is a strategic asset for Britain that thrives on and/or is blinded by the promise of the temple. And for a proper rundown on the grim reality there, I point you to the previous 2 episodes on this podcast feed.
The fucking temple.
So what the hell does a 19th century imperial power play and a story about a banking family have to do with Jeffrey Epstein? Everything. But most importantly, it shows that for over 200 years, the most powerful networks that have operated using private proxies, financial wizardry, and most importantly, a sophisticated system of misdirection and scapegoating to hide the real structure of control. Epstein didn't invent anything. He certainly didn't invent the idea of a private deniable intelligence operation built on finance and compromise. But he was the star of a much newer version of a very old and very dirty game. And to understand the following situation more so, we also need to look at how the British Empire played this great game in the desert. Because in doing so, they literally created the board on which the whole Epstein saga would later unfold. You have to understand that the modern state of Saudi Arabia isn't some ancient eternal kingdom that rose from the sands. It's a 20th century invention, a political entity, midwifed and strategically backed by the British Empire as a core move in their global power play. So at the start of the 20th century, the Ottoman Empire was dying and its grip on the peninsula was weak, which created a power vacuum. And you had two main contenders vying for control. You had the Hashemites, led by the Sharif of Mecca, and they were the traditional guardians of the holy cities, seen as the more legitimate and moderate Arab rulers. But then you had the House of Saud, I don't know if it's like Saud or Saud, led by a bloke named Abdulaziz ibn Saud. They were far more ruthless, driven by a pact with the hardline Wahhabi clerical establishment. Now, during World War I, British intelligence funded and controlled both sides. In one corner, you had the famous romanticized operation run by the Arab Bureau in Cairo. And this was the Hashemite track. Their operative was the man they made movies about, T.E. Lawrence, or Lawrence of Arabia.
Right.
His mission was to sponsor a Hashemite-led Arab revolt against the Ottomans, promising a unified Arab kingdom in return for their help. But in the other corner, you had the less famous, but ultimately far more important operation. This was the Saudi track, run out of the India office in the Persian Gulf. Their operatives were men like, and this is his legit name, Captain William Shakespeare. I think they should have made a movie about how William Shakespeare created Saudi Arabia, but we'll go with Lawrence of Arabia. Captain William Shakespeare and, most crucially, a high-level British intelligence officer named Harry St. John Philby. And he went native. He converted to Islam, and he became Ibn Saud's most trusted advisor. He was the ultimate agent of influence on the peninsula, and he had burrowed himself deep inside the camp of one of the contenders. And so after the war, with the Ottomans out of the way, Britain had to choose which of its client states to formally back as the dominant power in the peninsula, and they chose Ibn Saud. The reason was purely strategic. His fanatical Ikhwan warriors were much more effective than the Hashemites' military force. They were, they were the ones who could actually conquer and hold the land.
Right. Okay.
So while the Hashemites were demanding a vast unified Arab kingdom, Ibn Saud's ambitions were just focused on Arabia itself, which made him a much more manageable client. But the real kicker, the one that sealed the deal, was oil. Because as British and American geologists began to suspect the immense scale of the oil reserves under Saudi territory, the need for a stable, long-term and loyal client became the single most important strategic imperative. The British paid off the Hashemites by making them the rulers of the newly created states of Jordan and Iraq. But the ultimate prize, Arabia, was handed to the House of Saud. The Brits provided the funding, the weapons, and the political legitimacy at the League of Nations, and the crucial strategic advice from St. John Philby himself that allowed Ibn Saud to consolidate his power and create the modern kingdom of Saudi Arabia in 1932. This act created the entity that defines our entire investigation. A dynastic oil-rich kingdom born from a British intelligence operation whose security and existence have always been inextricably linked to the strategic interests of the Anglo-American establishment. A client-state relationship that was conceived in the corridors of Whitehall during the final bloody act of the Great Game. And in the perfect illustration of how the Great Game is a dynastic, multi-generational affair, St. John Philby's son was Kim Philby, who went on to become the most notorious Soviet double agent in the history of MI6.
Oh.
But empires fall, or at least they look like they do. And after World War II, this old British imperial machinery got a new engine and a new paint job. It went across the pond. Britain was broke. They had to take a big loan from the United States in 1945, and the empire started to strategically realign, liquidate some assets, and sort of take a step back from fully funding and running their vast empire. And you can feel this all the way down here in Australia. I mean, Melbourne was built on the threads of investment and influence of London, and in the post-war years, those threads were starting to fray. But like a lot of other places, the new, much stronger ones were sprouting up that led straight to New York and Washington. So on the surface, the old Rhodes Milner dream of a British-led world order was dead in the water. America was the new sheriff in town, and the great game was theirs to play. Only this time they weren't facing the Russian Empire. They were facing off against the Soviets, using things like the Marshall Plan to rebuild Europe and NATO and create a military wall. The Russian nobility, what was left of them, retreated to Europe after the revolution along with their loyal generals. And this is the thing, the Russian royal house and the German royal house, mind you, they're all cousins to the British royal family. So sure, they just came fresh off like a Cold War for the heart of Asia for the best part of a century, straight into two giant world wars. But, family is family. And they were welcomed into Europe with open arms, ready to regroup and join the fight against communism. But the Rhodes network didn't break at all. It just adapted. The people in the Rhodes network did great out of the wars. It was a strategic retreat, not a surrender. The ideas of the Round Table, this concept of a behind-the-scenes Anglo-American elite guiding world affairs, didn't go anywhere. It just compartmentalized.
Yeah, we've talked about this before. You don't really need the networks if you've got the individuals who are just doing the same thing.
Well,
anyway,
yeah.
right?
I mean, the Round Table groups
Their
are
interests
obsolete
are still
because
there.
all the infrastructure around them was set up and entrenched, So you've got Chatham House in London. You've got the Council on Foreign Relations in America. You've got the similar groups in Australia, Canada, New Zealand. The Bilderberg Group and later on the Trilateral Commission became the annual meetups to talk overall strategy. And, of course, the Mont Pelerin Society, which, much like the Rhodes Secret Society to the Round Table groups, would later become the inner circle of the Atlas Network, the propaganda wing of the new road to serfdom. This was the furthest thing from a collapse. It was a masterful pivot. The network proved it was more resilient than any single nation, and it was getting itself ready for the new reality of the Cold War. This meant getting their hands very, very dirty, which brings us to the real dark arts of post-war power, the Gladio networks. After 1945, NATO, I say NATO. It was NATO, but it was the CIA and MI6. They set up these secret stay-behind armies in nearly every country in Europe, stocked them with weapons, explosives, and communications gear, and left them to melt into the civilian population to fight a guerrilla war if the Russian tanks rolled in. What these networks became were tools for domestic political control. These became secret cells of paramilitaries, right-wing extremists, professional thugs, organised crime, all working off the books for Western intelligence to make sure communists never got elected. If that meant a bombing here or a political assassination there, and that's just the cost of doing business. When it finally all came out into the open in Italy in 1990, it blew the doors off the entire concept of democratic sovereignty. It's the great game playbook all over again, using private, deniable, and often criminal actors to achieve a state objective. Even, perhaps unsurprisingly, the Sovereign Military Order of Malta being used as a respectable front, a place where high-level intelligence figures could meet and mingle, while some of its networks were greasing the wheels for drug smuggling by the Italian mafia to fund these black operations.
Right, okay. And this is the Gladio network, you said?
Yes.
Right.
If you think this was just some European or American weirdness, you're completely wrong. This machine was going strong in Southeast Asia, including right here in Australia. We're talking about the Nugan Hand Bank, founded in Sydney in 1973 by an Australian lawyer, Frank Nugan, and a highly decorated ex-US Green Beret, Michael Hand. This bank looked for a moment like a big swinging new player in the financial world, but it was a complete house of cards. It all came crashing down in 1980 after Nugan was found shot dead in his Mercedes.
Oof.
The investigation started to uncover what it really was. A Gladio front. It was a rogue bank that allegedly laundered money for international drug syndicates, particularly the heroin trade out of Southeast Asia, which was being distributed through Australia with the help of the Queensland Police. It was deeply entangled with high-ranking military and intelligence figures from all over the world, and its lawyer, for God's sake, was William Colby, the former director of the CIA. In fact, William Colby's number on a business card was found in the jacket pocket of what's his name, the Nugan guy, Frank Nugan, when he was found.
John Nugan.
When he was found dead in his car in Sydney. The fact that it was initially thought to be implicated in the political turmoil surrounding the ousting of Prime Minister Gough Whitlam in 1975 and then never spoken of again should tell you everything you need to know.
Oh, yes.
After the collapse, Michael Hand, the ex-Green Beret, he just vanished off the face of the earth. Completely gone. Became one of the most notorious and wanted fugitives in Australian history until Ross Coulthart found him 20 years later somewhere in America.
This is the moment Michael Hand probably thought would never come.
Michael John Hand, Ross Coulthart, 60 Minutes Australia. We've been looking for you for a long time, sir. I think you're a pretty good likeness, don't you think? We'd really like to talk to you, Mike. We've been following you for a long time. You've got a really interesting story to tell. And moreover, there are a lot of people in Australia who are owed a lot of money by you. $50 million.
If you had the opportunity to confront Michael Hand today, what would you say to him?
The first thing I'd say is, where's my bloody money?
Huh. A little bit of an interesting aside there, but just adding further, a bit of confirmation that yes, this shit is real and it was globe spanning.
Yeah, I mean, far be it from me to, armchair investigative journalist, but I feel like they could have handled that approach a bit better, Right? He's
proper like a current affairs style.
It's like it's like obvious. That just puts him on the back foot immediately. They could have tried to get a little bit out of him before. But also, why is 60 Minutes doing this and not the bloody AFP or I heard an interview with Coulthart, I think it was the local news from the place where they found him, interviewed him. And I don't know, it was weird. He was like saying in one breath, like that he's, how he ran this multinational drug syndicate and fraudulent bank. And he's like this wanted fugitive, those a lot of people a lot of money. And then on the other hand, is saying like, oh, he's a war hero and he should be celebrated. And I don't think we're going to get him in any trouble. It's weird. Ross Coulthart is a weird unit. Anyway, well, good on those guys for tracking him down. Nice to see some journalists at work.
So let's be clear. It wasn't actually him. I don't think it was him who did the investigation. He was just the guy that was tasked to go there. It was another dude on the 60 Minutes that had done the investigation. So let's be real clear about the genius of this machine. It's not just the operations themselves, but it's the propaganda and the misdirection that comes with it. The people running these deep state privatized networks understood something. It's not that other people don't, but it's, I guess, maybe understood something long before other people caught on. The best way to hide what you're doing is to create a cartoonish, exaggerated version of yourself for your enemies to attack. While the real network, the one running drugs and guns through places like Nugan Bank, was getting its hands filthy, the story of the old Round Table group was allowed to fester and grow into the perfect boogeyman. The globalist cabal narrative became a lightning rod. And who started swinging at this lightning rod with all their might?
The hippies?
The John Birch Society.
Oh.
They saw the public face of this network, the Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission. And they screamed bloody murder about a one world government conspiracy. And you know what? They weren't entirely wrong.
No.
They spent all their energy pointing at the gentleman making speeches at the CFR luncheon, the public-facing intellectual side of the establishment. let's just call it how it is, they were /are the controlled opposition. To the members on the ground, it felt
JBS.
To the members on the ground, like the, card-carrying members of the John Birch Society, they felt like they were fighting the power, but they were working for the actual power. Meanwhile, the operational arm was busy running covert wars and laundering money through a network of truly nasty individuals. It's basically like them standing at the front door of the bank and shouting that the post office is stealing everyone's money while the bank managers are draining the vault through a tunnel they dug out the back. The nexus point of this world was the World Anti-Communist League, or the WACL. I'm just going to refer to it as WACL as we go. Founded simultaneously in Taiwan and Ukraine in the 60s, WACL became this horrifying umbrella group that brought together everyone from like legitimate conservative politicians to legitimate Nazis, Latin American death squad leaders, same, and a whole host of CIA assets, same. Michael Hand, the co-founder of the Nugan Hand Bank, was reportedly a member. The CFR and the Chatham House became an above-board place to discuss foreign policy, and WACL was a trade show for the anti-communist underworld. Nugan Hand was a brutal criminal enterprise masquerading as a bank staffed by figures from the nexus of organised crime and clandestine services, all networked through outfits like the World Anti-Communist League. It was one of the real dirty engines of the Cold War. But the roundtable story and the globalist cabal narrative championed by groups like the John Birch Society gave this whole machine its cover, created a false target, and allowed everyone to work in the shadows.
I'd like to have a look at some of the stuff that the JBS was saying about the roundtable and the CFR and that kind of stuff.
But look, this is beside the point. We got a lot to go over.
Yeah,
but we're just to understand that this is the swamp, this whole ecosystem of deniable operations, financial fuckery, and sophisticated misdirection that we have to understand everything that comes after it.
Yeah.
So in 1976, the Church Committee, which was this Church guy was a senator, and he had a committee looking into the operations of organized crime, because up until this point, there was no oversight in the CIA and even the FBI. They'd been created post-World War II, and they were just left with a budget and free reign to do whatever. And this is the whole period of MK Ultra and all this shit. And,
American imperialism, baby! Woo!
Yeah. And this a result of this committee is all the dirty laundry is aired. The CIA gets its wings clipped. The FBI has to junk all its dirty files on political radicals. And it seems like the era of the state running its own private goon squads is over. But almost immediately, a series of new creatures crawled out of the swamp to fill the gap. The first one on American soil was the Western Goals Foundation.
Yeah.
This was the intelligence wing of the John Birch Society. It was filled by a crew of some of the Cold War's hardest cases. Major General John Singlab, high-ranking CIA officer forced into retirement for criticizing the president. A guy called John Rees, a so-called journalist who was actually a professional spy and informant, and Congressman Larry McDonald, a hardline Democrat who was also the head of the John Birch Society. The official line on Western Goals was that it was a patriotic effort to keep fighting the commies, after the official government agencies had been neutered by left-wing politicians, as they put it.
Well, obviously, you got to fight those commies.
It was presented as a grassroots conservative response, and what a response it was. Its whole purpose was to privatize the work of COINTELPRO. This was the FBI embedding with all these anti-communist networks and not stopping them, helping them, presumably. Because new laws forced police departments to destroy their political intelligence files, Western Goals just took them. And they set up a massive computer database in Virginia to house them. And then they went on compiling dossiers on thousands of activists and politicians and anyone else they deemed a subversive. And they had a neat little trick to launder their intelligence. They'd leak dirt to friendly law enforcement, then publish their own skewed reports based on quotes from that law enforcement. And then McDonald, using his congressional privilege, would read their claims into the congressional record to shield the foundation from libel suits.
That old trick.
Yeah, so by 1983, when Congress had explicitly banned the Reagan administration from funding anti-communist Contra rebels in Nicaragua, Western goals stepped right up and started raising cash for them. They even named a 2,000-man Contra brigade the Larry McDonald Task Force after Larry McDonald was killed when the Soviets shot down Korea Airlines Flight 007 that same year. It's no surprise then that Major General John Singlab, founder of Western Goals, turned up as a key intermediary for a bloke named Oliver North, who was running the illegal weapons network for the Contras from the White House basement. It all came crashing down in 1986 when the Towers Commission, investigating this whole mess, exposed Western Goals as part of North's secret funding network, and the foundation was effectively shut down. The official story frames the whole Iran-Contra affair of selling illegal weapons to Iran to get hostages back and then illegally funneling the money to the Contras. They sell this as a rogue operation run by a few cowboys in the National Security Council. That story is bullshit. This was the first iteration of a privatized, deniable network in full swing. And at the absolute center of it all, internationally, the man connecting all the dots between governments, spies, and money was the Saudi billionaire named Adnan Khashoggi, the richest man in the world at the time. He was this entire system personified, a private citizen who could do what governments couldn't admit to doing. To understand how he got that role, you have to look at what was born from the ashes of the Church Committee's investigation in 1976. As the CIA was being publicly flogged and put in a leash, a new shadowy organization was quietly formed. It was called the Safari Club. It was created specifically because the CIA was now legally forbidden from carrying out these kinds of black ops that the establishment considered essential to fighting the Cold War. So they outsourced it. The Safari Club was a secret intelligence alliance between the intelligence chiefs of several key nations: France, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Iran, who was still under the Shah at the time, and Morocco. They
It's a very funny name.
Yeah. Well, I'll get to where the name comes from. They agreed to pool all their resources and run their own covert operations to pick up the slack from the hamstrung CIA. And do you want to have a guess as to who the CIA director was who gave this his blessing and became its unofficial American partner?
Not Singlab, or was it one of the guys from the bank? No,
it was George H.W. Bush.
No, yes, that was gettable.
The CIA couldn't be an official member, of course. That was the whole point. But they could liaise, share intelligence, and steer their allies to do the dirty work they could no longer do themselves. And the Saudi intelligence chief who co-founded this club, Kamal Adam, he just happened to be Adnan Khashoggi's brother-in-law. And every good covert alliance needs its own private bank, one that doesn't ask too many questions. For the Safari Club, that bank was the infamous Bank of Credit and Commerce International, or as I like to call it, the Bank of Corporate Criminals International, or BCCI. A massively fraudulent global institution later described as the most corrupt bank in world history. It was a perfect laundromat for drug money, terrorist funds, and the financing of secret wars. The Safari Club was named after the club that they used as their HQ, the club where the first meeting and every subsequent meeting was at, where they formed it. This club was owned by Adnan Khashoggi. So here's the picture. You got a privatized intelligence network, the Safari Club, created to bypass US congressional oversight. Then you have its own criminal bank, the BCCI, to handle the cash. And you have this high-flying, charismatic middleman, Khashoggi, who's tied by blood and business to all of it. He was the front man. He became known for hosting lavish parties, allegedly doing many of the same things alleged that Epstein would later do.
He's got some pretty impressive yachts that I can see here.
He became known for these parties with these girls on these yachts. And they were used as an operational cover, a place where spooks, arms dealers, and politicians could meet and mix and make deals. So when the Iran-Contra affair kicked off, Khashoggi was already in position, the perfect man to move the weapons from Israel to Iran and shift the profits to the Contras using his trusted network and banks like the BCCI. He was eventually indicted on fraud charges, and he became the perfect scapegoat, the flashy face of corruption, which then allowed the powerful Anglo-American establishment that built and used this private system to melt back into the shadows. Khashoggi was the quintessential arms dealer in that whole Cold War era and the bridge to the Arab world. I'm sure there was more than one European equivalent, but one, the noticeable mention, one in particular, is a different kind of operator. He controlled the flow of something a bit more valuable than money, guns, and girls. This is Robert Maxwell.
Right.
Now, if you only read the papers in the 80s, you know Maxwell is this larger-than-life, bombastic UK media tycoon, a former Labour MP who built a massive empire, the Pergamon Press, and later the Mirror Group newspapers, becoming a very big public figure in Britain. And it was a legit rags to riches story. There was a lot more going on with Maxwell, though. Many hats. While Khashoggi was hosting his parties on his yacht, Maxwell was doing the same thing on his own massive yacht, the yacht that he named the Lady Ghislaine.
Right.
Maxwell's real value, it's long been suspected, wasn't just in selling newspapers. It was in his deep and enduring ties to intelligence. Notably, as anyone who's mentioned his name in the last decade or so will tell you, the Mossad. Right. But the evidence there of him being on the books of Mossad is flimsy at best. I think there is. I think he did work for a like Mossad offshoot private business intelligence thing called Kroll Group or something like that. But regardless, for an intelligence agency, a friendly media baron is an asset you can't put a price on. You can shape the public narratives, kill damaging stories, and plant helpful ones. But the relationship allegedly went much deeper. There are persistent claims that Maxwell's companies were used to launder money and that he acted as a sort of logistical hub for various Mossad operations, even helping to procure Israeli passports for useful assets, including, allegedly, major organized crime figures like the Russian mob boss Semyon Mogilevich. So we're pretty positive that he was operating that same filthy section of state intelligence and international crime. So when Iran-Contra explodes into the headlines, what's Maxwell's role? Well, Khashoggi's moving the actual hardware. A guy like Maxwell is perfectly positioned to help manage the fallout and move the money. Through his newspapers, he could influence the story, framing it in a way that protected the core Anglo-American network. And behind the scenes, there were whispers of much more. After his death, investigators discovered he'd pillaged his own company's pension funds to the tune of hundreds of millions of pounds. But there's always been allegations of a much larger slush fund he used to finance these kinds of off-the-books intelligence operations. His social world certainly overlapped with all the Iran-Contra players. His yacht parties were just as legendary as Khashoggi's, another floating hub for the international elite to conduct their business, far from prying eyes. But he was a man of many hats, containing many secrets. Most certainly, he had extensive ties to Israel. And the most noticeable thing there was he helped sell this promise software to governments across the world that had this Israeli backdoor built into it. But, as I said, lots of hats. He was born Jan Ludwig Hoch in Czechoslovakia, a dirt-poor Jewish kid who watched his family get swallowed by the Nazis. He escaped and he made it to Britain in 1940 with bugger all. But he had a few things money can't buy. Charisma, a ferocious will to live, and a gift for language. He joined the British Army to kill Nazis, and he was quickly commissioned as an officer. His language skills and rabid motivation got him noticed, and pretty soon he's transferred to the Intelligence Corps, interrogating high-level German prisoners of war. That was his formal entry into the world of British intelligence. Now, I don't care how you explain it away, this is where he started. Based on his trajectory from here, there's no way that this is where it ended. They watched him, they tested him, they saw his capabilities and his ruthlessness. The establishment clocked him, logged him, and followed him away as a perfect long-term asset from day one. After the war, Maxwell's public-facing career as a publisher provided the most perfect lifelong cover imaginable. His primary function for the next 40 years, as far as I can see it, became being a deniable bridge to the USSR during the Cold War. His publishing house, the Pergamon Press, specialised in scientific and technical journals. This gave him his cover. his legitimate non-political reason to be constantly flying into Moscow, East Berlin as well, and other Warsaw Pact capitals. He could get into rooms that no intelligence officer could dream of. He could build relationships with top Soviet scientists and political figures, all under the cover of a business dinner. And from that position, he could gather intelligence on the mood in the Kremlin, report back on Soviet tech, carry deniable messages between London and Moscow during a crisis, and other very valuable, prized things for an intelligence agency. Seymour Hersh detailed Maxwell's deep ties to both MI6 and the Mossad in his book, The Samson Option. Other investigative authors like Gordon Thomas and Martin Dillon went even further, documenting his recruitment and decades of service, citing sources inside the intelligence world. But this is complicated further by the fact that the source they all lean on for this proof is the same one ex-Mossad guy who's never provided any actual proof to back up his assertion. So it gets murky, but Maxwell is the model for the point I'm trying to get at here. This is like the prime example of MI6 and the interlocking, shadowy interlocking nature of MI6 and the Mossad. The official media tycoon story of Maxwell has never been able to explain the basic holes in his life, like where his bottomless pit of money came from, or how a bloke who was constantly on the verge of going broke managed to constantly convince reputable banks to give him massive loans. How exactly did he get access to world leaders on both sides of the Iron Curtain during the Cold War? And he was publishing, he was going to Russia and publishing the scientific, all their scientific studies in his journals. So he was the bridge where all the intelligence agencies were getting each other's science from during the Cold War.
Right.
Which is something in itself. So Maxwell was working directly for the Brits, and he was also a massive asset for Israel, and also allegedly at times the KGB. But let's be real, he lived in Britain the entire time. He was the switchboard operator for the new great gang. His golden ticket, Maxwell's golden ticket in the 80s, was his close personal friendship with Mikhail Gorbachev. He became a confidant to the Soviet leader. He published his biography, and he championed him in the West. According to the sources I read, he was the one Western capitalist that they thought they could trust. But according to other things I also know, Clive Palmer was also a Western capitalist that was friendly with Gorbachev and going to visit Gorbachev in the 80s through his through his very wealthy Bulgarian wife. He still has shell companies over there, just saying. Then you get the other side of the coin, the persistent allegation that Maxwell wasn't just charming the Russians, he was working for them. Multiple sources, including defectors from the USSR, claim that Maxwell was recruited by the KGB and given the code name Ludwig. His job for them, if true, would have been threefold. Use his media empire to push Soviet-friendly disinformation, spot Western scientists and politicians who could be blackmailed or recruited, and use his maze of companies to help the KGB move money for their black ops. So, what's the takeaway here? Maxwell's Russian operation was the centerpiece of his career. He sold access to the East, to the Brits and the Israelis. He sold access to the West, to the Russians. His loyalty wasn't with Britain or Russia, really. His loyalty was to the deal, to the game itself, the money.
Trade routes, man. I'm telling you, it's all about those trade routes.
You have to, and you have to understand this because this philosophy is the worldview inherited by his favorite daughter, Ghislaine, who would have grown up breathing this in. This was her inheritance. The idea that loyalty is always transactional, that ideology is just a costume you wear for the customer, and that the real power isn't in serving a single master, but in being the indispensable broker between all of them. But Maxwell wasn't just a crooked businessman, nor was he just another cog in the privatized intelligence machine. As I mentioned already, he was a staunch Zionist. He did a lot for Israel as a nation outside of the alleged spying stuff, which gives plausible deniability to exactly why he had a state funeral in Israel and was buried on the Mount of Olives, opposite the temple. A privilege generally reserved for exceptional Israeli prime ministers and also, most recently, people like Sheldon Adelson.
Oh, jeez.
And I'm pretty sure at his funeral, like in the front row was like every former head of Mossad that was still alive. Okay, so we've set the stage. We've got Khashoggi moving arms. We've got Maxwell moving information and money. And Khashoggi moving money, probably more so. They were the key players, titans even, of this new privatized world of spooks and crooks. The early movements of some kind of global neo-East India Company. Understood? Any questions?
Sure. Yeah. Where's this going?
Important to also understand this is happening amongst the political backdrop of the rise of the new right, the Thatcher and Reagan years.
Of course.
Fueled in a giant part, in fact, almost in a total part, by the Mont Pelerin Society and their new worldwide network of think tanks, the Atlas Network. Essentially, this was a dismantling of the old post-war order of regulated economies and strong labour unions to be replaced with a new system of hypermobile, globalised financial capitalism. At the centre of this storm, acting as one of its primary architects and kingmakers, like one of the primary architects and kingmakers that created the new right, was a man named Sir Jimmy Goldsmith. He was a ruthless Anglo-French corporate raider. That's what he's described as anyway, with deep dynastic ties to the City of London's oldest banking families, including the Rothschild and his own Goldsmith family. He was one of the key financial backers of both Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan. His New York mansion in the early 70s was an embassy for this new aggressive ideology, and it was a place where immense wealth and political insurgency came together to talk strategy. It was like a Council for National Policy, but in the years before the Council for National Policy was founded by people in this same nexus of individuals. Now, one of the first things you learn at the Dirt Unit, one of the absolute cornerstones of any investigations when you're trying to piece together a network, the most important connections are the first connections. Who were the sponsors? Who brought them in? Who were they around? Because nobody, and I mean nobody, gets into this world on their own. With Jeffrey Epstein, the answer to that question, I think, is the single most important detail in this entire God-forsaken story. The earliest time we can place Epstein is the early 70s, as per this interview with the man who claims to be his best friend, or claimed to be his best friend at the time. Well, it wasn't best friends with him at the time. It's complicated. This was a New York scientist and art collector called Stuart Piver. And he mentions in a 2019 interview with Mother Jones following Epstein's death, Mother Jones basically just opened up Epstein's little black book and just started dialing numbers. The transcript for the start of their conversation goes like this. Hi, I'm a writer doing a story on Jeffrey Epstein. I was wondering if maybe you wanted to talk, if you had any interactions with him or if you ever met him. Jeffrey who? Jeffrey Epstein. Oh, that Jeffrey. Oh, I've heard of him. Laughs. Who are you? I'm writing for Mother Jones right now. Mother Jones, is that some kind of, it's a publication, a political magazine. I've heard of it from way back, right? Yeah, they've been around since the 70s. The reason I'm calling is because you were listed as a contact in his contact book. I was? Oh, I thought he knew my telephone number by heart. Oh, really? So you did know him well. Jeffrey Epstein was my best pal for decades. Really? Yeah, Jeff. I adored him. Where did you guys meet? One day in the early 70s, a friend of mine brought me to Jimmy Goldsmith's mansion on the east side. As I walked in, there in this grandiose lobby was a grand piano, and there was someone playing that piano with great virtuosity. It was Jeffrey Epstein. That's how I met him.
Huh.
So there it is. The earliest mention of Epstein I could find. Years earlier than I've seen any of the reporting I looked at anyway. It's the early 70s, playing piano at Jimmy Goldsmith's mansion. This is Jimmy Goldsmith, the British billionaire of the Goldsmith and Rothschild banking dynasties, the man that funded both Thatcher and Reagan, one of the key architects of the new right.
That's the informational archaeologist there for you folks.
And this is supported by corroborating reporting from the late 80s that it details his friendship with Jimmy's daughter. And then the actual reporter mentions that he called Jimmy and Jimmy told him to watch out for Epstein. This is 87, so, about 15 years later. And we don't know much about the interim years from there. But by the late 70s, he was teaching math at the Dalton School in New York, which was run at the time by Bill Barr's father, Donald Barr. And at the same time, Bill Barr was working for the CIA. From the Dalton School, he entered Bear Stearns under the patronage of Alan Greenberg, New York finance big shot and a member of the Council on Foreign Relations.
Yes.
After leaving his job at Bear Stearns in 81 under questionable circumstances for a supposed wonder kid, he quit the band and started his solo career, his own money management firm.
So this is pretty much all I do know, because I think this is like all that's publicly available. But he was studying maths, right? And then his friend's dad, like his friend noticed that he was really good at maths, and then his friend's dad worked at Bear Stearns, and that was that guy you just mentioned, whatever his name was.
So,
and then he gets the job at Bear Stearns, basically, and then he becomes within 4 years, he's managing something or other.
He wasn't studying math; he was teaching math.
Was he not studying before?
I think he studied math like in his school days.
Yeah,
but he was teaching it, and
okay.
I mean, I'll get to it in a sec, but but what he did was he left after a couple of years, and I'm pretty sure he made partner at Bear Stearns. He worked his way up really quickly.
Exactly.
And
that's all I know. That's the reason I want.
But he was only there for 3 or 4 years, and then he left and he went solo and he started his own money management firm. So this is the linchpin. I think what we're seeing here is a guy who was initially an outsider, working his way into these circles, forming relationships. Ends up. I think he went backpacking to the UK when he was younger.
Yeah.
And he ended up being like a supporting musician for a famous orchestral, I think maybe a violinist or something.
Right. And
I think that's how he ended up finding his way into the Jimmy Goldsmith circle. You'd have to presume, because that's all we know about him. But he's forming relationships. The Dalton School, I don't really know what to make of, because Donald Barr ran it when he joined, but Donald Barr was on his way out, so he left a month or so after Epstein started.
Right.
There was an investigation by the Kroll group. It was an investigation. They were commissioned to do an investigation into him in the 90s. It was actually commissioned by people from Les Wexner's companies because they were concerned about him getting so close to Jeffrey Epstein. So they hired this Kroll group to look into him. Mm. And they determined that he faked his resume in order to get the job at Dalton. So he faked his resume to get the job there, but then he made connections there, and then Bear Stearns was his foot in the door to finance.
Yeah, you're right. He was teaching, not studying. Sorry.
His first solo client isn't officially known. We don't have documents that say what his first solo client was. His earliest confirmed client is a guy called Douglas Reese. It's a British businessman who later became embroiled in arms trafficking controversies. But we know his office was located at 57th and Madison, which is probably the most interesting bit, because that happens to be the same building as the US office of the man who Epstein himself said was his first client. And that man's name was Adnan Khashoggi. Hmm. So we'll just pause for a moment and let that sink in for a second.
His first office is in the same building as Adnan Khashoggi.
And according to Epstein himself, his first client was Adnan Khashoggi.
Epstein's told us that.
Yeah. So whatever the connecting dots are that we can't see, he was plucked from relative obscurity. Within a few years, he was plugged directly into the central financial hub of the Iran-Contra network during its absolute peak. And the real story begins with the red flags from this era. And probably the biggest one is the strange, fraudulent Austrian passport that Epstein kept, which listed his birthplace as Saudi Arabia. So that means that he used a Saudi Arabian birth certificate to get the Austrian passport. It all lines up perfectly. And that passport was a tool of the trade for his work with Khashoggi. During the height of Iran-Contra, Epstein was almost certainly one of the trusted guys handling the complex, dirty financial flows of the operation, likely through the criminal sewer of a bank, the BCCI, that his patrons controlled. So what does that make him in the 80s? He's a junior associate. Like, I'm not saying literally, I'm saying like he's essentially the junior associate in the firm of Khashoggi and Maxwell. He's the apprentice. He's learning the trade from the inside, seeing exactly how these guys move black money, how they build networks of influence, and most importantly, how they use secrets and compromise as a form of currency. By the end of the 80s, he was a fully fledged product of the system, ready and equipped to launch his own franchise. So, in the 80s, how close was Trump to these guys? Were they palling around at Studio 54 every weekend? Probably not, though Roy Cohn was representing Studio 54 as a lawyer, so maybe at times. The public friendship, the terrific guy stuff, that starts flowering in the 90s and 2000s. The 80s, though, is where their worlds collide, and the man standing right in the middle of that convergence was Adnan Khashoggi. So you got Jeffrey Epstein, the backroom financial wizard, managing Khashoggi's money, funneling it through all the dodgy accounts linked to BCCI. Then you have Donald Trump, guy who blown through his small startup loan of $1 million from his father, and he needed massive injections of cash to build his real estate empire in New York and Atlantic City. Trump's entry into this world came from Atlantic City. To understand this, you have to understand the asset he acquired, Resorts International. On paper, Resorts International was a respective casino or casino company. The reality, as documented in books like The Money and Power, the reality is that it was a direct operational successor to the CIA's anti-Castro operations of the 60s. It was originally called the Mary Carter Paint Company, a confirmed CIA front used to launder payments to Cuban exiles.
And this is who he bought the casinos off?
This is what Resorts International was. Its chairman, James Crosby, was a known associate of Meyer Lansky, very famous mobster, and its intelligence arm, internal, was a corporate CIA staffed by top investigators from Robert Kennedy's Justice Department and operatives from the CIA, the FBI, and the IRS. Its primary European funding, according to multiple investigative sources, came from Geneva-based Banque de Credit International. This bank is alleged to have been the primary slush fund for Mossad. So Resorts International was not a company, it was a joint venture between the CIA, the mob, and Mossad. It's a premier off-the-books intelligence and money laundering hub on the East Coast. And when Atlantic Casino was open for business, Resorts International was granted the very first casino license. Then in the 1980s, the handover took place. Trump's first major casino properties in the Atlantic City boardwalk were purchased directly from Resorts International. Demonstrate that throughout this decade, Jeffrey Epstein, in his role as Khashoggi's money manager, would have been one of the key figures in this financial ecosystem, especially in Atlantic City, where Khashoggi was a legendary high roller, famous for just rocking up and losing a shitload of cash really quickly, aka just like laundering his fucking dirty money through the casinos. Yeah. So their relationship in the 80s wasn't the cozy party boys of the 90s, but it was a professional overlap within the same ecosystem of dirty money, political fixing, and deniable operations. Two ambitious young men being groomed by the same network of corrupt, powerful old men. Their official meeting happened in the tail end of the 80s, probably around 87, but whether it was the actual first time they met or not, it was the public introduction of two guys who'd been worming through different parts of the same crooked network for years. And to really understand Trump's context, you have to understand Roy Cohn, his mentor. Officially, he was a lawyer. He first got famous as the attack dog counsel for Senator Joe McCarthy during that whole thing in the 50s. But that was just him stepping in on the scene. For the next 30 years, he became the most powerful, most feared, and most connected fixer in New York City. He was
highly recommend the recent film, The Apprentice.
Yeah, I haven't seen that, but I want to.
It's very good. Jeremy
Cohn was a fucking predator.
Great job.
he's straddled the line between legitimate power and the criminal underworld better than anyone before or since. And seriously, like, forget the Epstein list making Trump look bad. How's the client list of Cohn? He's throughout the 70s and the 80s, he was the favor broker for a vast array of people, like the top politicians of the democratic machine, like not like the Democrats, but the system of democracy in general. Simultaneously, the mob, like Nancy Reagan, the proprietors of Studio 54, and the Archdiocese, the Catholic Archdiocese of New York. Andy Warhol, Rupert Murdoch, Cy Newhouse, Alan Dershowitz,
anyone
and Donald
who's anyone.
Trump. Yeah, sorry. You continue.
I think that Roy Cohn, perhaps more than anyone, is the person responsible for the rise of Donald Trump. He was the one who gave him the formula of how he does everything, which is just deny and attack. Just say, fuck you, I won. I'm right. This is actually brilliant. I'm really cool. You're wrong. And then just go on, his whole thing, which you see him do every day in all of his interactions, is just declare victory and go from there. And that's exactly where he got it from.
And I think he gave Trump more than just that. Because this is where it plugs right back into the story. Roy Cohn sat on the advisory board of the Western Goals Foundation, the intelligence wing of the John Birch Society, run by Major General Singlab and Congressman MacDonald, the one secretly funding the Contras. Cohn was part of the command structure. He was the legal muscle and the political cover for their domestic operations.
I hate these people so much.
So the Church Committee has just exposed the CIA. Congress has put him on the leash. The Contra came like almost 10 years later. That was the definite last straw. They cannot no longer pick up the phone and ask the mafia to help them out, handle a problem, embed an asset. So what do you do when your old school trusted criminal partners are now too hot to handle? You go white collar. And something that's worth noting, just as this pivot is happening, because I thought I'd better check on some other players, just as like this money and influence is moving into these new legitimate corporate structures tied to the private intelligence network, through Cohn and Western Goals and Khashoggi and the Safari Club. Onto the scene at this same time bursts this, what the media labelled, crusading young prosecutor named Rudy Giuliani. His entire career, like his entire public image, was built on being the great mob buster. And he was pretty good at it. Rudy Giuliani single-handedly, systematically dismantled the 5 families that have run New York's underworld for a century. He took them down one by one. To New York City, he was a hero. But if you look at the timing, Giuliani took down all of Roy Cohn's old clients. Giuliani, regardless of his motive, was providing a public service, burning the old assets, turn liabilities, and making room for the new, slicker, more politically connected corporate syndicate.
Is that, do you also get, what's his name, Jared Kushner's dad? Is that what I'm thinking of?
I'm not sure.
I think he might have.
Yeah, it kind of looks less like a war on crime and more like a hostile corporate takeover. Giuliani acting as the liquidator, wiping out the old assets so the new guys can move in. The operation got a whole public relations facelift, and the thuggish gangsters were replaced by the aggressive New York businessmen. But the game remained exactly the same. Then in 1986, with this new system firmly in place and the old one lying in ruins, Roy Cohn dies of AIDS, a disease that he publicly denied having until the very end. Now, I'm just going to go with that and say he probably died of AIDS. I don't know the guy. I can't be fucked trying to find out so sure. But the timing is very convenient. He's removed from the board right before the Iran-Contra scandal blows up, taking all the secrets of the transition from mob rule to corporate rule with him to the grave. The establishment story paints him as a tragic, hypocritical figure. The real story of Cohn is that he was a key architect of the modern deep state, the man who helped privatize crime itself moving it from the streets of Little Italy into the penthouses of Fifth Avenue. And he left behind a very successful student who had learnt his lessons very, very well.
The apprentice, as it were.
I'm talking, of course, about Roger Stone.
Oh,
Cohn's other protege. But also Donald Trump. We've established the Iran-Contra affair, which blew up in 86, exposed a big problem for this network. Khashoggi was getting burned. BCCI was starting to look dodgy. And the whole messy, illegal, deniable black ops model was suddenly too public. It looked like a total failure. But the architect class, the writers, the real power players, they weren't just sitting back and watching it burn down. Men like Frank Carlucci, the then National Security Advisor, they saw the writing on the wall. They understood that this old way of doing things was no longer sustainable. Can't rely on back alley arms deals and murky offshore banks. They need a new vehicle to institutionalize and legitimize this nexus of intelligence, finance, and defense contracting, but under a squeaky clean corporate Wall Street friendly banner. Their solution to this was the Carlyle Group. Carlyle Group is the direct corporate successor to the Iran-Contra machine. The founding of Carlyle in 1987 was the handiwork of a conglomerate of key individuals from the absolute top of the American establishment. Frank Carlucci, like I said, became its chairman emeritus. He's the former National Security Advisor, Secretary of Defense, Deputy Director of the CIA, and then he co-funds Carlyle. You've also got George H.W. Bush, the former president, former director of the CIA. His involvement gave it unparalleled access and credibility, particularly in the Middle East. There was James Baker III, former Secretary of State and White House Chief of Staff. He became senior counsel. And just to show you how global this thing was intended to be, John Major, the future Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, would later join as its European chairman, proving its deep integration into the British establishment too. I mean, if we want to talk about other key parts of Carlyle Group, didn't join till a few years later, but still in the years following this, the Saudi Bin Laden Group, the massive construction conglomerate owned by Osama bin Laden's family, became a significant and publicly known investor in the Carlyle Group.
Got it.
And it's a bit more concerning when you realize what Carlyle Group was. This is what they called the Iron Triangle. There's a symbiotic relationship between the Pentagon, the defense industry, and US Congress with all the key players involved. I've seen it referred to as my favorite thing I've seen it referred to as is the self-licking ice cream cone. Carlyle was perfectly positioned to influence the very defense and foreign policy decisions that would create a market for its products. They knew what conflicts were coming because they were helping to plan the foreign policy that would lead to them. They'd use their immense capital to buy up defense and intelligence contracting companies that would build the weapons and provide the services required by the potential conflicts that are going to happen by the policy that they're coming up with. Then they profit immensely when the governments they influence awarded them massive taxpayer-funded contracts to the companies that Carlyle owned. So the more global instability and conflict there was, the more valuable Carlyle's portfolio of defense companies would become.
What fucking planet are we living on, man? Like, what is this?
This? I want to make the point here that these guys, this is not a flaw in the system being exploited.
No.
This is the system by design.
Yeah.
This is, I don't know. Look, if you ask me, I think the Carlyle Group is the one that owns the board here. It's the ultimate expression of this neo-East India Company model, a private entity that had from its very beginning fused corporate finance with national security and created a self-sustaining engine of profit and potential conflict. Okay. The perfect bridge from the exposed ways of Iran-Contra in the 80s to the sleek, deniable operations that would define it for the next few decades. So that's the foundations of Epstein. So up to this point, the late 80s is what set his stage. He's popped up in Jimmy Goldsmith's house in the mid-70s, fakes his way into the Dalton School, taken under the wing of Alan Greenberg, gone to Bear Stearns, leaves, becomes the money manager of Adnan Khashoggi, The official intelligence community gets put on a leash, forces the creation of this private network. The first public iteration of this network, the Western Goals, has its cover blown and fails spectacularly. In the Iran-Contra scandal, all those people get taken down. Adnan Khashoggi himself is tainted by the affair and is temporarily silenced. And it looks like a massive defeat for the network. But only if you think Iran-Contra was the only game these guys were playing at the time. And it wasn't. It wasn't even the biggest one. It was the one that got loud. The network that underpinned it, the global club of spooks, crooks, and right-wing fanatics called the World Anti-Communist League, was involved in something much, much bigger. While Congress and the media were obsessing over a few crates of missiles being sold to Iran, the real Super Bowl of covert operations in the 80s was happening somewhere else entirely. Afghanistan. The Soviet-Afghan war was the CIA's dream come true. Well, it was Zbigniew Brzezinski's dream come true anyway. A chance to give the Russians their own Vietnam. People like Kissinger and Brzezinski, basically the Alfred Milner to the Rockefeller, DuPont, and Morgan's Cecil Rhodes, aka the inheritors of the Cecil Rhodes vision for the American century, saw this as a perfect opportunity to bleed the Soviets dry. The agency funneled billions of dollars into the anti-Soviet resistance, the Mujahideen. This wasn't an official American war. It had to be deniable. And this is where the WACL network became essential. Figures like Major General John Singlab, the co-founder of the Western Goals. He was shuttling back and forth, helping organise the arming and funding of Afghan freedom fighters. WACL was the clearinghouse, the private deniable hub connecting CIA cash and hardware with Saudi money and Pakistani logistics. It was the same playbook as Iran-Contra, just on a scale 100 times larger. But an operation this massive needs more than just guns and money. It needs propaganda. You can't just handle a bunch of Islamist fanatics. You can't just hand a bunch of Islamist fanatics a truckload of Stinger missiles and hope for the best. You got to sell the story to the world. You have to convince at least the American public and the wider Muslim world that these guys are noble warriors fighting for freedom, not religious extremists fighting to establish a medieval caliphate. You need a trusted voice on the ground, someone who can craft the right message. The man who ended up being the embedded media liaison, the man who shaped the official story of the Mujahideen for both the Western and Arab audiences, was a young, Western-educated Saudi journalist named Jamal Khashoggi, Adnan's nephew. He was deployed by the Saudi intelligence services under the command of Prince Turki bin Faisal. His official role was a journalist for state-aligned papers like the Saudi Gazette. This gave him the perfect pretext to be in the war zone, right in the thick of it. But his real job was to serve as the chief propagandist for the Saudi-backed Holy Warriors. His articles from the front lines consistently lionized the Arab-Afghan fighters, sanitizing their ideology and reinforcing Saudi Arabia's image as a defender of the Muslim world. But he was not just a journalist, as we said. He was an embedded liaison. His cover and his family name gave him unparalleled access to the Mujahideen's command structure. And this is the most critical activity of Jamal's entire decade-long apprenticeship of the 80s. He didn't just stumble upon and interview a charismatic young Saudi engineer who was organizing the flow of foreign fighters and money. He cultivated a long-term working relationship with him, likely formed through the existing relationship between both their families' construction businesses. And this man's name was Osama bin Laden. Jamal Khashoggi, in effect, was the designated GID liaison to the man running the primary Saudi-funded proxy force on the ground. His reporting built bin Laden's heroic legend, both back in the kingdom and in the West. He became the PR agent for the man who would become America's public enemy number one. So, by the time this 80s wrapped up, this network had successfully groomed two highly specialized next-generation operatives. In the West, Jeffrey Epstein had mastered the art of financial warfare and elite seduction. In the East, Jamal Khashoggi had mastered the art of information warfare and proxy management. And these are the two direct lines stemming from Adnan Khashoggi in the early 80s. Both of these men were now seasoned assets, each controlling a different part of a board. two parallel forces running full steam ahead, each headed in the opposite direction, but on the same track, perfectly positioned for the inevitable collision of their worlds a decade later. But let's not get ahead of ourselves just yet. One point I'm going to make here is that we've just covered the entire 80s and all the foundational context of Jeffrey Epstein, and Israel is not directly there once. So I'm sorry, but this idea of him being an Israeli agent, a Mossad agent, or a Israel military intelligence agent, which I think is Whitney Webb's conclusion. No, like the whole entire hypothesis I'm running on here is that Israel itself is a distraction. It's like a giant continuation of this Jewish scapegoating, medieval Jewish scapegoating, but it's just like an entire state now that is like what is, when you're talking about Israel, like even if you're saying Epstein's working for Israel, like what are we talking about? What is Israel? Because he's not, like, I've got Israeli friends. I know plenty of Israelis. They're all awesome. He's not working for them. You know, like, I don't think when people are working for Israel, but they don't live in Israel, they might be Jewish. But I think it's a smokescreen.
Okay.
And it certainly looks that way. I mean, if you put it against
they don't appear to be a big player in this mix, certainly.
No, and this is like, well, yeah. I mean, the ties come, but look, like, I mean, you got to look, like, if you think of this like looking at, like, say, a disinformation network, right? And say, the prime example was probably the one I've done the most extensive writing on, like the freedom movement, right? The yardstick that you always come back to as a rule. It always proves itself, even if it's like 5 years later. The people they entered this world with are the important people to give the context of what this is. People that come in later, it's irrelevant, you know? And in this case, it's like, it can come from a whole bunch of, there could be a whole bunch of motives behind it.
Yeah.
On Epstein's part, even. But, like, it doesn't change the fact that, like, this is what the machine is. Like, it could be I'm sure it's used for a lot of different things over the preceding 30 years. But I mean, I don't know what else I can say. These are the facts. And as we continue to track this network through the 90s and the 2000s and stuff, it paints a completely different story as to maybe what the blackmail is for. Like, I don't know if I can say that for sure. I mean, who knows really, but, like, certainly narrows the scope a lot, and things make a lot more sense. But I digress. How long are we gone? An hour 47. Should we just leave it at the 80s and then continue with the 90s another time? I
mean, that seems like a logical place to cut it.
Yeah, well,
I'm happy to keep going, but
the next, well, we're halfway through.
Okay, so yeah, that's a pretty good pause point.
Yeah, all right, we'll stop at the 80s and then we'll do it this 80s, 90s, 2000s. Yeah, all right, we'll do it that way.
I think we've laid a lot of the important groundwork there. We've outlined the pieces. We've got the broad shape of the networks. We know where they're coming from, what they're trying to do.
If anyone's listening to this and, maybe seeing some hints at maybe some potential future events that go, okay, what's going on?
I can see where a few of these people are going to go over the next few decades, yes.
I will just say there's so much more. Like, there's so much more. Like, whether Epstein is a part of this network or not, which he certainly was, it's pretty fucked. It's pretty fucked. We're pretty fucked.
It's just because rich cunts want to get richer. This is the thing. This is the thing that's been getting me. It's like you say it's just because rich cunts want to get richer.
can they even get rich? I don't think they can get richer. Like, I think
Not measurably.
people like this, like architect class, this is untold wealth. You know, like the Rockefellers, the DuPonts, the Mellons, the fucking the Rothschilds, the Goldsmiths. These people, they've got all the money and power in the world.
It's a different mind, isn't it? There's something weird going on.
And this Jimmy Goldsmith guy, his tie into politics is he's part of
The referendum party?
Maybe they call it like the Mayfair set or something. It's like basically it's the Cecil block, but 100 years later or whatever, or 50 years later or whatever. So like, you know, it's just this continuation, it's this literal continuation of this same network around Rhodes that, you know, all these elite families are connected to anyway.
Yeah.
Interesting bit of information that I'll just throw in here because God knows if we'll ever fucking get to it at this point, is that in my research into the Great Game, I learned that, so of my obvious question, if anyone who's listened to the Dirt Unit before might understand, this is my obvious question, is, okay, well, this is a war for Central Asia, fought by, you know, the British out of India, Nepal and Tibet, the central focus. In the period of time that a Russian aristocrat, a member of the Fabian Socialists and a rabid Marxist, English member of the Fabian Socialists and a rabid Marxist Freemason and a former American colonel created the Theosophical Society in India. And in the book that I read, I can't even bloody remember what it's called, but the book on the Great Game, there's a really fucking interesting bit of information in there. Elena Blavatsky, I want to say 1874, but I might be getting that confused with the creation of the Theosophical Society, sent a letter to the Russian intelligence.
Right.
Offering her services,
Yeah.
and saying, I can't remember the exact quote, but something to the effect of, I must confess that most of my channeled communications have just been my own words for my own gains.
Most of them.
And then basically, I would be the perfect asset for your war.
Right. I remember something about this, yeah.
And it's interesting because it's like then you've got the Knights of Malta, the Russian priory, the other half of the Knights of Malta that Napoleon expelled from Malta 100 years earlier or whatever. They're living like with the Tsar as his like private intelligence fucking wing. And then in 1905, they move to America and they become the Shikshini Knights of Malta, who is the same Knights of Malta that all these former CIA directors and operatives of the sort of like architectural layer of that whole CIA aspect of the Gladio era are a part of. This is their other fucking club. Not to mention they created the I Am activity, you know, like, and they're right there pretty much straight away. And the inner circle of William Dudley Pally, America's most famous high profile Nazi.
It's enough. Leave us alone.
This is pre-World War II, yeah. So it's what I'm trying to say, Daniel, is it looks like it's all one thing.
Right.
And
which is what? Power and control and money and
drugs and girls, I think, is like the main business. This is why when I say Neo-East India Company, I'm referring to like the opium side of the East India Company. Like this is the main business for all. I don't say it much in this because the reason why I gave up on YouTube like pretty much straight away is because I was getting my videos reported and they were falling outside of the rules of YouTube and I was getting strikes and it was like I put months into these things and then just to have them fucking taken down and I can never put them up again. I even had I had the clip, like the video of my Cambridge Analytica episode on my Google Drive and it got a strike. The video file on my Google Drive you couldn't watch it.
what?
Yeah. so I was like, this is fucking bullshit, and I stopped. So I'm not emphasizing that, but just to be clear, like drugs, it is fucking drugs. Like these guys run, like this is where heroin comes from. These guys.
That's without even getting into the whole, crack cocaine and the American.
That was this.
Thing.
This was the CIA. This was the CIA importing drugs from Colombia in the same planes that they were shipping weapons to the Contras from. They'd ship weapons to the Contras to Nicaragua, and those planes would come back full of cocaine, and they'd land in Arkansas, where Bill Clinton was governor.
Fuck. It's not good, man. It's not good.
No, it's not good.
It's good work, though. Good research.
What a line of research to decide to put my face back on camera again.
Well, here we are. Let's see if this one, how many strikes this one gets.
It gets, Daniel, I cannot stress how fucked things get.
Okay. Well, we'll always have the podcast at least.
Yes. Yeah. So anyone watching this, do your thing on the channel, please. But also jump on the podcast feed because it's the only place that you're going to be guaranteed to just be in constant touch.
Talk of a political dirt unit.